All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. We start with the veto sending shockwaves in the Republican Party. Governor Eric Holcomb this week vetoed the bill that would have prevented transgender girls from taking part in school-sponsored sports. In his message to lawmakers, the governor said the bill implies there is a problem that needs government intervention and that the goals of fairness and consistency in girls' sports aren't being met, and that after thorough review, he found no evidence to support either claim. Now, lawmakers are expected to hold a vote in May to try to overturn that veto.
Let's welcome in Indiana Democratic Party Chair Mike Schmoll. Mike, on the topic of the transgender athlete bill, what is your reaction to the governor's veto of that bill? And can your party peel off enough votes to sustain that veto?
You know, I think it's the right call. I think Governor Holcomb was right and sound when he decided to veto this bill. I think that what he said is something that I agree with, which is there's not exactly dozens or hundreds of these cases that are before high schools and teams and different sports leagues all across the Hoosier state. And so this is something that has been coordinated by the Republican Party across the country, really a kind of a culture war manufacturer, something that's been created to distract us from the real issues that matter to folks. And so I really believe that bodies like the IHSAA should look into these issues, not politicians at the State House.
Following up, though, do you think your party in the General Assembly can peel off enough votes to sustain that veto?
I'm not sure. I think that remains to be seen. Obviously, this is what we get for living in a supermajority environment in both houses, unfortunately. One of the things that I'm working on to make our state a little bit more balanced, a little bit more fair, a little bit more competitive, not only in primaries, but in general elections. So we have a true two-party state government here in Indiana. So I don't know. I think that it's important for every member in the House and the Senate to talk with their constituents, talk with families, talk with kids. Who just want to play on sports teams with their friends, compete like many of us do across the Hoosier state. We have a great tradition of fabulous sports here in Indiana. So I do hope that they talk to their constituents and see that the governor is right on this. And this is something that should be up for a professional body, professional association, or amateur association to take a look at these issues.
Now, before the governor acted, he was signaling that he was possibly leaning in favor of the transgender athletes bill and against the permitless carry bill. That was the other high-profile bill that he was among the final bills he acted on. Ended up signing the permitless carry bill and vetoing the transgender student athlete bill. Do those actions surprise you?
A little bit, yeah. I think that the permitless carry bill is really dangerous, frankly. I think we need to think about a few things here. Number one, and I want to be very clear with the folks that are watching today, the Indiana Democratic Party, we support the Second Amendment. In the same breath and the same time, we support responsible gun ownership. And I think that that's where the vast majority of Hoosiers are and the vast majority of Americans are. And so this is something that actually takes resources and accountability and a safeguard away from our law enforcement, our public safety professionals. To see Doug Carter, the head of the Indiana State Police, the top law enforcement public safety person in our state, come out against this piece of legislation tells you a lot. And I think his points in the committee hearings and throughout this process were really spot on. He said, I wish that folks at the General Assembly would think about our frontline public safety workers, not their next primary election or not their next election for public office.
So
that's
do you
pretty
think
damning comments? And so I am surprised. I thought the governor would support his top cop and not kind of cater to the far extreme elements of his party.
So do you think Indiana will become a more dangerous place come July 1st?
Well, it's certainly going to be a lot easier for folks to get firearms and to get a gun in this state. I think that having a permit to own a firearm, to purchase a firearm, to go through that process is really important. We shouldn't just allow folks to get guns who want them without some sort of safeguards and things in place. And so I do think if there is an influx of guns or firearms exchanges or things like that, that falls squarely on the Indiana Republican Party. We need to be doing everything we can to support our public safety officials, to support cops in Indiana. And you saw with this piece of legislation, Republicans in the State House and the governor were on the opposite side.
I want to turn briefly to the confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Did the GOP go too far in its questioning on Judge Jackson, particularly as it pertains to her rulings on a number of child pornography cases?
I think they did go too far. She is supremely qualified, and what's curious or not so curious to me anymore in politics is a lot of folks, a lot of Republicans on these committees and in the United States Senate have already voted for her, have already confirmed her for other positions. This is just the Supreme Court. This is the highest court in the land. Now they're posturing. Now they're attacking her, her character, her experience, her professionalism, all of those things. We didn't see this kind of temperature with Amy Coney Barrett, fellow South Bend person, I might add, when she was going through her confirmation hearings. And so I think this is a woman who is supremely qualified. She will be the first person, obviously first African-American woman on the court. She also was a public defender. And I think that that is important. So a lot of these cases that they've talked about, that they've criticized, we have a justice system that has a prosecution and a defense. That's how justice works in the United States of America. And so I think that that experience is welcome in this regard.
Now, you brought up Amy Coney Barrett, but what about your party's treatment of now Justice Brett Kavanaugh when he was going through the confirmation process? How does what happened with Justice Kavanaugh differ from what happened with Judge Jackson?
I think that issue was slightly different. I think that they're criticizing Judge Jackson and maybe talking about her stances and how she has worked in a court of law on different sides and behind the bench as a judge. I think that they are looking at those pieces. I think with Justice Kavanaugh, it was an issue of personal behavior and character. And so I do think that is a little bit different. They're not criticizing Judge Jackson for her personal behavior, for how she conducts herself. I think she's an exemplary individual. The other case with Kavanaugh, I think, was slightly different.
State Democratic Party Chair Mike Schmoll, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, coming up, a national media firestorm over Senator Mike Braun and comments on interracial marriage. You'll hear exactly what he was asked and exactly what he said next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. We turn to the controversy swarming Senator Mike Braun this week. You've probably seen the headlines from around the country. Braun telling reporters during a virtual news conference that decisions on interracial marriage should be up to the states and not the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, later that same day, the senator told Wish TV that he misunderstood the line of questioning and walked back his comments. So today, we want to do something virtually no one else around the country has done. Play the questions and answers, including the question before the one on interracial marriage, so you can decide for yourself.
You spoke about judicial activism. If the Supreme Court later this year strikes down the right to abortion, would you consider that to be judicial activism, legislating from the bench?
I consider it to have been judicial activism when it occurred back almost 50 years ago. So I think this would be bringing it back to a neutral point to where that issue should have never been federalized. Way out of sync, I think, with the contour of America then. And this basically puts it back to a point where, like most of these issues, where one side of the aisle wants to homogenize it federally, is not the right way to do it. This should be something where the expression of individual states are able to weigh in on these issues through their own legislation, through their own court systems. Quit trying to put the federal government in charge of not only things like we did navigating through COVID recently, where I think that was misguided, but in general. So no, I think this takes it back to a point where it should have never gotten beyond in the first place.
That same basis to something like Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court case that legalized interracial marriage.
So when it comes to issues, you can't have it both ways. When you want that diversity to shine within our federal system, there are going to be rules and proceedings. They're going to be out of sync with maybe what other states would do. It's the beauty of the system, and that's where the differences among points of view in our 50 states ought to express themselves. And I'm not saying that rule would apply in general, depending on the topic, but it should mostly be in general, because it's hard to have it on issues that you just are interested in when you deny it for others with a different point of view.
So you would be okay with the Supreme Court leaving the question of interracial marriage to the states?
Yes, I think that that's something that if you're not wanting the Supreme Court to weigh in on issues like that, you're not going to be able to have your cake and eat it too. I think that's hypocritical.
What about Griswold versus Connecticut?
Well, you can list a whole host of issues. When it comes down to whatever they are, I'm going to say that they're not going to all make you happy within a given state, but that we're better off having states manifest their points of view rather than homogenizing it across the country as Roe versus Wade did.
For perspective, Griswold versus Connecticut, that case deals with married couples using contraception. Now, we want to give you the full statement Senator Braun gave to us. Earlier during a virtual press conference, I misunderstood a line of questioning that ended up being about interracial marriage. Let me be clear on that issue. There is no question the Constitution prohibits discrimination of any kind based on race. That is not something that is even up for debate. And I condemn racism in any form at all levels and by any states, entities, or individuals. That's the quote from Senator Mike Braun. So will those comments mean political damage for Mike Braun, Indiana's best political team? We'll talk about that next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday as we welcome back part of the state's best political team, Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Brian Gaddy. Good to see you both. Let's start with those comments by Senator Braun on interracial marriage. As always, ladies first here on All Indiana Politics. Whitley, just how damaging are these comments long term for the senator?
America loves a saucy soundbite. They love the clips and they want to be outraged. I think that the question, without the context of the previous question, did seem as though he was saying that this should be a decision left up to states and that he didn't agree with the Supreme Court. But once you play it in the full context of the conversation, he's just being an advocate for limited government and conservative policies to say that states should decide what's best for them and we should federalize a lot of these different decisions. I think the truth is Republicans in Indiana are growing. We've seen that number. We're growing in our leadership. We're growing in our diversity, and we're going to continue on that track consistently. So I don't think that it's going to have any major effect, and we probably will not be talking about this next week.
Brian, your response, sir.
Well, we Democrats will be talking about it because my new nickname for Senator Braun is Senator All Brawn, No Brains. The fact is that Loving v. Virginia is settled law. I didn't realize we were still talking about interracial marriage in 2022. The Republicans, in their pandering to their far-right base, have to always engage in the most radical rhetoric in order to satisfy their right wing. And this is definitely an issue that we Democrats here in Indiana will be bringing to the voters. Does Senator Braun is he actually against interracial marriage? Does he really think this is an issue that we should be talking about? Loving v. Virginia is settled law. And there is no reason why Senator Braun should even be talking about this.
So, Brian, do you believe
Senator
that
Braun, all brawn and no brains? Senator all brawn, no brains.
Do you believe that he misunderstood the question, or does he really believe that, in your opinion?
If he misunderstood the question, he shouldn't even be in politics. I mean, the question was a straightforward question. He should have understood it. And as I like to say, mulligans are in golf, not politics. So if he didn't understand it, he should have understood it.
The truth of the matter is he wasn't talking about it. He was specifically asked about it. He didn't bring this up out of nowhere. It was the reporter who asked. And the truth of the matter is Democrats will harp on this gaffe, but when the president of the United States
gaffe, no doubt about
called someone a great Negro, we didn't hear anything about it. Democrats didn't say anything about it when he was talking about Satchel Paige. He called him the great Negro of that time. And we didn't hear you say anything or condemn any of those words. But here we have a gaffe, and then we also have a statement that—
But Whitley, he was also talking Negro League Baseball, wasn't he?
And there happens to be a problem. This is one-sided hypocrisy from the Democratic Party that we continuously see time and time again.
But he was talking Negro League Baseball when that happened, right?
Negro League Baseball. Satchel Paige was a Negro League Baseball
The great Negro of that time. He didn't say the great Negro League picture. The great Negro. Listen, Joe Biden has a history of racist comments in America. A history of racial comments. Whether he talks about—
I think we could probably do an entire half an hour on this thing, but I have some other topics to get to, guys. Hold on. I have some other topics to get to, as you guys very well know. The Supreme Court nomination hearings this week. Have Republicans given her a fair hearing, Brian?
Absolutely not. The Republicans have engaged in their usual ridiculous questioning. You got Josh Hawley, the guy that raised his fist at the insurrection, just asking ridiculous questions. Ted Cancun Cruz, are babies racist? I mean, just ridiculous questions. Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee, what can you define a woman? What does this have to do with being a Supreme Court justice? These are the things that Republicans do in order to rile up their base and engage in the culture wars that they engage in. So absolutely not. They've only made fools out of themselves, and they have not treated Judge, soon to be Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson with the respect that she deserves. So no, they did not conduct themselves with any glory at all. In fact, they make fools out of themselves.
Whitley, in your opinion, was that a fair line of questioning from the Republicans?
I think that there was a fair line of questioning, and I think that the treatment of Judge Brown is on par with the treatment of Justice Thomas. So when we look at how the Democrats treated Justice Thomas when he was getting nominated to the Supreme Court, it is exactly, it is exactly on the same par of treatment. The truth is, criticism is not racism. And I know that the left would like for us to think that it is, but that's the truth. In her own words, under oath, a year previous, she stated that she lacked sufficient judicial experience with constitutional cases. And so now here she is getting the next appointment to sit on the U.S. Supreme Court.
I'll explain most of the Republican senators voting for it.
She stated under oath that she lacked the experience on constitutional cases. And so I think some of the lines of questioning are denoting the time that we're in. Whether or not she defines what a woman is important, because we have bills around the country about women and transgender.
That being said, Whitley,
so it is very relevant to today's time to go along that line of questioning and to find out how she would uphold the Constitution.
Quickly, Whitley, is she qualified to be on the Supreme Court, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think that her education, her trial experience, and her judicial background make her an excellent candidate to be a judge. I don't think that her constitutional experience with cases, as she stated a year ago, qualifies her to consistently sit on a Supreme Court that
She's more qualified than most of the judges.
I have less than a minute left. I want to get your opinion on the transgender athlete bill. Brian, go ahead again. Keep in mind, less than a minute. Go.
Well, I'm glad Governor Holcomb vetoed that bill, because that bill would have codified discrimination And we do not condone discrimination in the great state of Indiana. So I'm glad Governor Holcomb vetoed it. I just hope the Republicans.
Okay, Whitley, go ahead. Your thoughts on the bill?
Push it through.
Listen, Governor Holcomb stated the reason for his veto was the language of the bill, but that he definitely supported boys playing with boys and biological girls playing with girls in sports. And so I think it was the language that he felt was a slippery slope and potentially unconstitutional. Okay. So I do see this bill coming back, and I do see it passing.
See what happens. Guys, good to see you. Thank you for taking some time. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. You can also find our brand new All Indiana Politics podcast. It's part of our All Indiana Podcast Network at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.